Hello, everybody. It's a couple of minutes early. I like to get the live stream started a few minutes early just to make sure that we're not running into any technical problems, but it appears as if we're good. We're scheduled to start in 2 minutes. So if you are by chance viewing the archival video, you could scroll ahead 2 minutes because the formal program is not going to begin quite yet. Anyhow, I'm very happy to be here. I'm looking forward to addressing your questions. I have a few things I want to discuss today, so I'll be giving a short monologue, and then I'll be happy to take all the questions you can throw at me. And let me say this as well. To preface what's going to happen for the rest of the day, that we save the questions that I don't get to. And in particular, I am looking for questions that could eventually become the subject of an in-presence monologue, something that might require a 10 or 15 or 20-minute answer. So if you have questions of that sort, even though I may not get to them today, I'm certainly going to be looking carefully at all of the questions that don't get answered for possible inclusion in a future in-presence monologue on the new Thinking Allowed channel. I trust all is well here with the live stream. I haven't double checked it. And it's 3 o'clock Mountain Time, so I'm very happy to begin. Welcome, everybody. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today is the 22nd of November in the year 2020, and I want to make a few remarks that I think are particularly pertinent to the day today. I want to talk about cognitive dissonance, and in particular, a book, I think it was published back in about 1954, a classic text in sociology written by Leon Festinger and his colleagues called When Prophecy Fails. And I think it's very relevant to what's going on at the present moment in many, many ways. What Festinger did back then in the 1950s, and many sociologists discovered a fascinating opportunity to do sociological research because there was a UFO cult in Chicago, I believe headed by a lady named, I think it was Dorothy Martin. I'm not exactly sure. The precise name doesn't matter. She was doing automatic writing, and she received a message that the world was going to end on a particular day. And there was a lot of thinking behind it that had to do with when the world was created 6,000 years ago and various prophecies. But they were in touch with aliens from the planet Clarion who are going to send a UFO down to rescue these particular people, like in Noah's Ark, before the world ended. And the newspapers got wind of this, and many members of the cult took it quite seriously, quit their jobs. I think somebody even got a divorce over this, and made plans to leave the world. And they got more and more messages from automatic writing as to the exact time and location when the UFOs would come to pick them up. Now, Festinger, being a materialistic sociologist, assumed, of course, that none of this was going to happen. And he figured this is going to create incredible cognitive dissonance for the members of the group who made huge commitments. They, quit their jobs. They made financial commitments. Some people may have sold their homes to get provisions ready. I don't know all the details, but many people took it very seriously. And the sociologists were eager to see what would happen. Well, when the appointed day came and the world didn't end, another message came through in automatic writing saying that the God of Earth has decided to spare the Earth because of the fervent prayers of this group. And at this point, the people who had made an enormous commitment to the group, to the automatic writing, had a choice. They could continue to buy into the ideology of the group, or they could say, our prophet made a mistake. Now, actually, in fact, many people did. They walked away from the group when the prophecy failed. But Festinger noted that the people who were the most committed actually became even more devout about it. They wanted to go out and proselytize about how wonderful this group was. And the lady involved lived until 1992, as I recall, became very active in the metaphysical community, the UFO community, continued to do her automatic writing and had a following. I'm told that this group actually still exists today. Now, how does this affect us now? One way would be to think in terms of parapsychology. We have 140, some 138 to be precise, years of empirical data supporting the findings of parapsychology. In spite of all of this data, you have skeptics out there. In fact, I just saw an article in the Chicago Sun about 2 weeks ago saying ESP and psychokinesis don't exist. Just look at the science. So I sent the author of that article, a scientific article from the American psychologist summarizing 1,400 experiments in parapsychology with overwhelmingly positive statistical data. Do you think that that reporter is going to be influenced by the data when he has already published an article saying the science is on his side? This stuff doesn't exist. So on the other hand, sometimes skeptics will say to me, what would it take you to be convinced that psi, as parapsychologists call the term, doesn't exist? And I think about that sometimes. What would convince me, given that there are, hundreds of studies suggesting that it does, and of course my own experience, which I've amply documented. Now, politically, we're in a similar situation in a way. We have the largest number of people ever in the history of the United States who voted in favor of an incumbent president. So it's over 70 million people. And the president is now claiming that even though the vote tallies show that he lost, those tallies are illegitimate because of fraud. And the president says he's going to prove his case in court. So far as I know, the courts have thrown it all out. But we don't know the final outcome of all of this. The supporters of the president say he is going to be inaugurated again for a second term once all of the fraud becomes clear and the courts evaluate it, or the legislators make their decisions. And of course, the mainstream media and the supporters of President-elect Biden maintain that no, Biden is going to be inaugurated on January 20th. The result is already clear. The votes are in. The election is in effect over. All that's left to do now are the formalities. So we have a situation where one group or the other is going to be confronted with a failed prophecy. And the question then becomes, how are they going to respond? And if we look at the sociological theory of cognitive dissonance, the theory predicts that those people who are the most strongly committed to one position or the other position will actually strengthen their commitment in the face of a failed prophecy. That is to say, if at the end of the day, Biden is inaugurated, the supporters of President Trump will be more adamant than ever, at least those who are the hardcore supporters, more adamant than ever that the election was stolen from him because of fraud. And if, on the other hand, Trump pulls the rabbit out of the hat and he is the one who was inaugurated because of the actions, let's say, of the Supreme Court or various state legislatures or the Electoral College, the supporters of Biden are not going to accept that result either. The hardcore supporters, no matter what evidence Trump brings up before the Supreme Court or before any other administrative body, the hardcore supporters of Biden are going to say that Trump stole the election. That's a very interesting situation. And as I point out, it very much parallels the situation with regard to parapsychology today. I think it's fascinating, and it should give all of us pause to think about the role in which our cognitive processes, our ability to evaluate facts and evidence, is influenced by our social commitments and our emotional biases. No matter where we stand on this spectrum, we're all vulnerable to this in one way or another. So that's my little spiel for today. I think it provides food for thought. Sociologists, I'm sure, will be very interested in evaluating how people respond at the end of the day. What percentage of people will admit that when the final inauguration takes place, that the data was valid, that the process was valid? And what percentage of people will not accept the result? And what will be their motives and arguments? And how is that going to affect the nature of local and world politics? Now, I see a number of questions have come in. So let me start with a question from my friend Russell Targ. He says, what are my thoughts about synchronicity? Is the world causal and understandable? I am very positively inclined towards the theory of synchronicity as enunciated by Carl Jung and with, I think, assistance from Wolfgang Pauli, the great quantum physicist. And viewers of New Thinking Allowed may be interested in knowing that there are 3, I think, very important episodes, interviews in our archives with Brendan Engen. Now, Brendan co-authored with me an article in the Journal of Humanistic Psychology. It was called Archetypal Synchronistic Resonance. So I tend to think that we live in a world that is causal at one level. Yes, indeed. Every time I go into my car, I expect it to start when I turn on the ignition. And so it's very important for me that the world is causal, but it's not only causal. We live embedded in a realm of consciousness in which archetypes are active and principles that don't fit physical causality the way it's understood in science. In fact, I could quote a great scientist, Sir James Jeans, who once wrote that the universe itself seems more like a great story than a great machine. A great story is influenced by emotional factors. It's influenced by archetypal factors. It's influenced by a sense of purpose, a sense of direction, things that are outside the realm of physical science. Lucas Mannion says, Jeffrey, politically speaking, why does it seem that only far-right proponents seem to be willing to take psi phenomenon seriously, or phenomena seriously? Lucas, I know that many people on the right are subscribers to the new Thinking Allowed channel, and that there is a propensity for people with a right-wing orientation to be open to psi. But certainly they're not the only ones by any means. I, for example, and most of the people that I know in parapsychology are political moderates or liberals. So I think that interest in psi cuts across the political spectrum. But it's fair to say there's also been a tendency for people who have a left-wing orientation, even a communist orientation, to be materialists and to reject psi out of hand because of their commitment to materialism. But I don't think it's the case that people on the right are never materialists. I do think that probably amongst people in the organized so-called skeptical movements, there are more people who are politically liberal, but it's not exclusively one way or the other, far from it. Batman Astronaut asks, have you read Jacques Valet's work? And if so, what do you think of his findings? Indeed, I have read Jacques Valet's work. In fact, I conducted my first interview with Jacques for the KPFA radio back in 1973. I remember the date very well. In fact, it was a date for me. I was living at the time at the Institute for the Study of Consciousness in Berkeley. Jacques came over to the Institute. I interviewed him there, and I was on a date with Janelle Barlow, who happens to be my wife now. That's one of the reasons I remember it so very vividly. In fact, I even remember after the interview ended and Jacques Valet went back, I think his name was Marcus Foster, there was a murder that took place of the Oakland superintendent of schools that was all over the news on that very day. Had to do with the SLA and the Patty Hearst kidnapping and on and on. But the real question you're asking me is, what do I think of Jacques Valet's findings? I think very highly of Jacques' work, because what he has endeavored to do is to take the hardcore data of ufology, that is radar sightings, video sightings, many of the contactee reports, his own personal investigations of people who have have experienced UFO sightings and the like, and looks at it throughout history, relates it to ancient mythology. I think he's making an argument that we are dealing with some sort of a super sensible force. It manifests currently as what we call UFOs, but it's been around for a long time and has manifested in many different forms over time. And I'm very highly disposed to that point of view. BR says, I believe we are spiritual beings. I am taking a social science university course that looks down on such a belief because they hold there is no evidence. How can I reconcile the two viewpoints? That's a very good question, BR. That is the kind of question that I could answer in a 15 or 20-minute monologue. But today, I'm going to give you the short answer, and that is that if we look at what there is evidence for and only establish our high probability of something existing because there is scientific evidence, we would have to exclude a lot of things. Of course, we'd have to exclude most religious claims, but even you would have to exclude the idea that other people are conscious. We don't have evidence of anyone else being conscious, direct evidence. We only have that for ourselves. And because that's our subjective point of view, even that doesn't count. So you actually have philosophers like Denning, who will claim, and people of that ilk in philosophy, that consciousness itself is an illusion. There's no evidence for it. And so the criterion of having evidence is only useful up to a point. It's great when you do have evidence, but there are lots of things that exist and that we're perfectly entitled to believe exist in the absence of evidence. I think most people in your social science class will accept the fact that the other members of the class are conscious beings, even though they lack evidence for it. And what does it mean to be a conscious being? To be conscious, one might well say, means to be a spiritual being, because to be conscious means that we partake of a kind of larger consciousness. Some people call it mind at large, that exists independent of our brains, that our brains act as receivers of consciousness, not as generators of consciousness. Now, of course, the mainstream view in neuroscience is not that. The mainstream view is that the brain generates consciousness, but the idea that the brain doesn't generate, but is actually a filter receiving consciousness and narrowing it down so you don't get overwhelmed by being aware of everything all at once, that some people experience and call cosmic consciousness. Well, it may be a minority view, but it has a very elegant history in philosophy. You will find that it was advocated by great writers like Aldous Huxley. I'm pretty sure it was a view that people like William James subscribed to. I think it's consistent with the viewpoint of Arthur Schopenhauer, Carl Jung, many great thinkers. So even in the context of a social science course, a viewpoint that we are spiritual beings has a respectable heritage. Mark Miller asks, how do you keep such a positive and pleasant attitude? Thank you for noticing, Mark. And I was thinking about that today. My wife and I go hiking in the morning here in the foothills next to the Sandia Mountain in Albuquerque, where we live. And we like to spend our time when we're out hiking talking about the positive things that happened to us in the previous day. That alone is a good thing to do. In fact, Martin Seligman, one of the founders of the field of positive psychology, recommends it. He says, spend time every day thinking about the good things that happen. And as I was doing that, my wife had just had a very successful meeting of her chapter of the National Speakers Organization. It went so well, and she was elated. And I thought, doing all of these interviews and then editing them all and preparing for them all has put me into a mental space of continual elation. I get so high from the ideas that are discussed on the new Thinking Allowed channel. It's been, for the last 5 years, one of the most wonderful things in my entire life. And so here I am in my mid-70s, and I can say life just keeps getting better and better because of what New Thinking Allowed has done for me. And I hope some of that rubs off on you. I think maybe some of it would. I think there are people who listen or watch the videos every single day. And it's my impression from the feedback that I receive that very often it makes an incredible difference for people. And then when I hear about that, I get even more excited and more positive. So I'm in heaven doing this work. And I hope that as a result, it opens a doorway for many other people to experience the divine realities of consciousness, parapsychology, metaphysics, spirituality, human potential, and the other topics that we discuss on this channel. Okay, let's see. Jip Atkinson says, hello, Jeffrey. Have you witnessed telekinesis for yourself? In other words, have I performed telekinesis? I haven't really done anything that I would call, demonstrable telekinesis. I haven't really bent any spoons to any significant level. But if the question refers to have I witnessed other people doing it, I actually sponsored Uri Geller's first public performance, major public performance in the United States back in 1973. I've witnessed Uri Geller many occasions performing psychokinesis or telekinesis under conditions that I would regard as satisfactory to convince me that it was legitimate. And now I know every time we talk about Uri Geller, somebody will say, yeah, but what about on Johnny Carson? That proves he's a fraud. Of course it doesn't. Even if he out and out cheats on some occasions, it doesn't discount the occasions on which he performed telekinesis or many other physical mediums and psychokinetic subjects in the past have performed psychokinesis or telekinesis. So I'm perfectly satisfied that it exists. And of course, I wrote the book, The PK Man, a 10-year study with Ted Owens. Russell Targ, who posted a question earlier, is the person actually who introduced me to the Ted Owens files. In fact, he gave me all of his files and said, please take them off our hands. But I studied the man for 10 years. He sent me written announcements of various large-scale telekinetic effects that he intended to perform, usually involving such things as UFO sightings, power blackouts, control of hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, heat spells, cold spells, ending droughts, and the like. He was roughly 2/3 successful in making these predictions of what he claimed he was causing. So I think, I guess you could call that a witness in the sense that I received the statements in advance of what Owens tended to cause, and then these are large-scale events, so they were in the newspapers. Here's a question related from David Wood, who is an artist who's contributed some interesting artwork for us from time to time. Do you think Ted Owens would have become more powerful with his psi abilities if he lived longer? Is there a limit to what a human being can achieve with psi? My sense, David, is that Ted Owens' abilities were declining around the time of his death. I had kind of lost interest in working with him for quite a while. He was making wild and crazy claims that didn't come true. So sometimes people's, the height of their powers is not at the end of their life, on the one hand. On the other hand, we don't know the outside limit of what can be accomplished. One of my mentors, woman for whom I have great respect, Jean Houston, suggests we are God seeds or godlings in the making, that maybe we're on a very long journey toward absolute omnipotence. As far as I know, that seems to be a reasonable position. Understand asks, what is my relationship with Jason Reza Georgiani? Have things been mended? Well, I've sent Jason an invitation. He's welcome to come back on New Thinking Allowed for a live stream like this or an interview anytime he feels that he's ready to do so. I do think it's important that we hash out our differences. He has advocated a total warfare against China, mainland China, and against the Sunni Muslim civilization. He has said that both of these civilizations need to be brought to their knees so that they can never get up again. That is, I'm 100% opposed, or 180 degrees opposed to that idea. I think it's one of the worst ideas I've ever heard in my life. But I love Jason. I really do. He's been a great guest on this series. He's one of the most articulate, intelligent people I've ever met. And I'm sure he could defend his positions with great passion. And I expect when he's ready, he will do that. But as far as I'm concerned, they show no compassion, no empathy for the horrible suffering that is caused by wars, and that's an issue that needs to be addressed. But I need to say this in Jason's defense, or against my opposition to Jason. It would be this, that, you know, the symbol of the New Thinking Allowed channel is the rainbow yin yang. And what we see in the yin yang image is that everything contains within itself the seed of its own opposite. So you can take a warmongering stance, like we must destroy these gigantic civilizations with billions of people. And when you work through it, you may find that you come out on the opposite end. And actually, Jason may be doing a great service by articulating these stark positions so forcefully, because it will ultimately result in a Hegelian dialectic where you have a thesis and antithesis and a brand new synthesis. So I don't think that Jason is totally off base in raising the kind of social critiques that he raises, but when I learned that he came out so vociferously in such a warmongering posture. And it's hard for me to imagine a more warmongering posture than to say we must totally destroy these civilizations. It pushed a button in me, and I felt I had to separate myself from that, especially because I'm engaged in and have been raising money for Jason, over $1,000, I think, since the time when I came out and accused him of being a warmonger. But warmonger or not, I'm very fond of Jason, and he will be welcome on this channel when he's ready to do so. And that's because, in a larger sense, my own feeling about it is that I embrace the universe. I feel that the ground of being that created every kind of phenomenon, positive or negative, good or evil, animal, mineral, or vegetable, is all part of the ground of being that is at the very root of my own being. There's a sense in which I just identify with all and everything, and which means that I don't want to reject any part of the universe ultimately. And I guess that means I'm kind of a Advaita Vedantist in some sense, a non-dualist. And I know many people take issue with that, and for good reason. I understand the value of dualistic thinking. So it really just, to me, it depends on what level you're coming from, because we all exist simultaneously on many levels at once. And from a non-dualistic perspective, sometimes you come up with things that are just the opposite of what you might experience from a dualistic perspective. And I wouldn't be a pacifist if I didn't engage in dualism from time to time, because from a non-dual perspective, life and death, war and peace are all part of the great wholeness. Here's a question from Sandite, 26. I'm curious if you've ever had, and if so, what's your thoughts are on the DMT experience? Never had DMT directly. I did take ayahuasca on one occasion a long time ago, but I remember it vividly because I got in touch, is really quite a surprise to me at the time, under the experience of ayahuasca, which contains DMT. I got in touch with the beingness of the ancient Egyptian god Horus. Horus, some people might say, is another version of Jesus. Horus, the myth of Horus is how the god Osiris, the father of Horus, is killed by his brother Set and chopped into pieces. And then Horus comes and defeats Set, and he becomes like the rebirth of Osiris. So it's a myth of death and rebirth. And while I was experiencing DMT or ayahuasca, my sense was that Horus is the most beautiful of all the gods. Now, in my regular state of consciousness, I can't say that I subscribe or don't subscribe to that view. I'm certainly not a joiner or a follower, particularly of any religion, having been born Jewish and basically becoming a secular person. I think I've had enough of that. But it was a memorable experience for me. Ricardo Luis Lugo asks, do you think that ancient structures amplified psychic abilities? What are your thoughts about ancient structures and their relationship to human and divine psyche? Ricardo, that is a wonderful question, and it brings to mind my dear old friend, Kevin Ryerson, because I've traveled with Kevin to Egypt. I've been inside the Great Pyramid with Kevin. I've been with Kevin to Machu Picchu, inside the sacred sites of Machu Picchu. And Kevin would go into trance when we were at those sacred sites. And his ostensible spirit guides, I was never able to convince myself one way or the other that they were autonomous spiritual entities or part of Kevin's own psyche, because I think of Kevin as a genius in his own right. But in any case, he was very interested in ancient archaeology and ancient architecture. And he believed that those structures were indeed specifically designed to amplify aspects of consciousness. And when we were in those structures with him, and he was going into trance, talking about the properties of those structures, it was very convincing, I have to say. It seemed to me that he was speaking from a level of depth and wisdom that resonated with me. It rang true. Now, that's ringing true is not a scientific evaluation, but I'll go with it. Okay. Alyosha says, can you comment on the notion that destruction and creation come hand in hand? Is destruction necessary for the sake of creation, a necessary sacrifice for future good? Again, what a wonderful question, Alyosha. And far be it from me to give you a final answer on something like that. For example, I think when Jason Giorgiani calls for the out-and-out destruction of the ancient Chinese Confucian civilization and the Sunni Muslim civilization, that's what he's thinking of, that something even better is going to come out of it. And my gut reaction is, there must be a better way. We don't have to create such enormous human suffering. Let's be creative. Let's think about how we can resolve the real problems that we face on a socio-political level without the necessity for such destruction. But if we look more deeply at, for example, the mythologies of all of our cultures. In the Hebrew Bible, you have the flood that was necessary. God had to destroy the world in order for there to be another rebirth, and so there was a flood. In the Hindu scriptures, you have Shiva, who is the deity of destruction, and Brahma, the deity of creation, and as I recall, Vishnu, the deity of being. Although sometimes in different traditions, these get reversed in different ways. But there's much to be said for creative destruction. I can't say that I have a final opinion. You know what, Alyosha, when it comes to asking me a question like that, I have Libra rising in my astrology chart, which means that I'm going to weigh and balance both sides. And I'm much less likely, I suppose, to come down heavy on one side or the other. I do see the value of creative destruction. I do think that over time it becomes necessary. The dinosaurs had to go extinct. All the enormous species of the Cambrian explosion before the dinosaurs had to go extinct. I suppose it'll be the case that someday the human race itself will go extinct for something else, hopefully something better to emerge. But at the same time, I certainly don't like advocating destruction. I don't. Here, KL asks, is it possible to be cursed or possessed? How to deal with it? KL, I do think that this is possible. I don't want to rule it out as a possibility. However, I think that it's rare. I think that in many cases where people believe themselves to be cursed or possessed, there very likely are other explanations. You might be ill, or you might have had a run of bad luck. I think before making a determination of something so extreme as a curse or a state of possession, you would want to rule out other possible interpretations. But let's suppose that after all that, you've come to accept that you have been possessed. I would recommend that you look into, certainly not a religious exorcism, unless you happen to belong to a religious faith and you're comfortable with that. But there are people who practice various forms of hypnosis and psychological practice who are involved in what they call depossession. Sometimes are shamanistic practitioners. I've actually interviewed a couple of people like that on the New Thinking Allowed channel. I've interviewed Dr. Charles Tremont. I think he's retired now and no longer practicing. I've interviewed Terence Palmer. If you just do a search in Google, or actually a search on the New Thinking Allowed website, you'll come up with those particular interviews. Dr. Palmer, incidentally, has written a book called The Science of Spirit Possession. And he practices a form of therapy he calls spirit release therapy. And there are actually practitioners of this therapy around the world in different locations. The last time I heard from Dr. Palmer about it, he indicated to me he is collecting case histories of people who have been through spirit release therapy. I think he said he has over 750 individual case histories, and he's in the process now of evaluating them. Johann Hemberg says, I presume there have been studies of animals and psi capability. If so, what about using selective breeding to try to increase the effect? Johann, there have been a few studies. They're not particularly memorable. There's a famous case of fraud in the field of parapsychology involving one of those studies. The stories regarding animal size sensitivity have been largely anecdotal. I've experienced it myself. I think it's very real. To my knowledge, nobody that I know of has endeavored to use selective breeding to try to increase the effect, because after all, most people are interested in increasing the human size. So and there's a good deal of folklore regarding people who come from families that have a history of psychic functioning in the family. But no, in terms of scientific studies in that area, there's very little to go on. Ramsey's World asks, Jeffrey, how would you describe yourself? Materialist, dualist, idealist, panpsychist, or something else? It depends on what day of the week you ask me, because some days, if you ask me, and people have asked, so I can remember the answers I've given them. Sometimes I'm a agnostic. I will say, well, we just don't have the data yet and we may never. It may be that these are metaphysical positions that are not amenable to evaluation in terms of data. I also think that, though, that the idealist position, I'm very comfortable with it. I've done many interviews on the New Thinking Allowed channel with my friend Bernardo Kastrup. He's, to my knowledge, the most articulate person defending the idealist position. However, it's not the only position, and they're very articulate defenders. Even the materialist position makes sense to me if you realize it could be expanded. We could take a look at, for example, hyperspace, the existence of higher dimensions of space. How would that impact materialistic metaphysics in terms of the mind-body problem and spiritual experiences? So I think of these things as being languages, and it's very useful to be able to know the terms, know the terminology and the language of these different metaphysical positions. I don't feel a necessity to subscribe to any one or the other right now, but I would say if I had to choose, I'm leaning toward the idealist position. Understand says, in all of your experience, Jeffrey, what methods work for manifesting? I like that word, manifesting. I'm very happy with that word. Earlier, one of our viewers asked me about telekinesis, and I had to say, no, I haven't bent any spoons or other silverware. I haven't raised storms. But what I have done is I have manifested the life of my dreams. What I'm doing right now, talking to you, is basically what I asked for when I took Ted Owens training back in 1986, after he had successfully predicted the crash, the explosion of the Challenger space shuttle. I realized I better pay attention to this guy. he had called me up, I think it was Christmas Eve, 1985, and said, Jeffrey, this is the most important phone call you will ever receive. It's up to you to call the US government and get them to stop that space shuttle, because if they don't, my UFOs are going to shoot it out of the sky. Well, I ignored him at that point. I think you would have too, because number one, he hadn't lately had a very good track record. And number two, the US government wouldn't listen to me in any case. But when the Challenger explosion occurred, I realized it might be worth my while to take his training. And he asked me, I had him come to San Francisco with 3 of my friends, and he had us all in a hotel room for 3 days, basically in hypnotic trance, all of which is tape recorded. Still, I have the recording today. And he asked me, what do you want to do with this ability to have these powers? And I thought, I don't want to raise storms or do the kinds of things he was doing, and droughts. I said, what I really want to do is be a communicator to the mainstream of our culture about the esoteric and psychic realities. And that's what manifested for me. So now, how does that apply to you? What methods can you use to manifest the life of your dreams? First of all, I would say to you, strive to become the best version of yourself. That's what you want to manifest. That means being the best husband or the best father or the best son or brother or sister or friend to your friends. It means fulfilling your passion with regard to your career ambitions. Realistically, doing what you have the talent to do, not doing something completely unrealistic, like, for example, overturning the results of an election. But you also have to be patient. You have to keep your focus on that which you wish to manifest and be patient about it, because you cannot snap your fingers and have these things happen. You know, it was 1986 when I had that conversation with Ted Owens. That was over 30 years ago. And within a few months of that time, I did start to do the original Thinking Allowed series, and it was wildly successful beyond anything I had dreamt about. We got out on over 100 public television stations across the United States and Canada. But I feel much more fulfilled today than I did then. So, 30 years later, it's still happening. And I don't have any magic formula that I can give you in just a few moments, except exactly what I've said. Focus on your highest potential, becoming the best version of yourself. Keep that focus and be patient. Trust the universe, because when you try to be the best version of yourself, my experience is that the universe wants to help you to do that. But it doesn't mean you won't have to face enormous obstacles. One of my mentors was Arthur M. Young, the inventor of the Bell helicopter. He was a student of alchemy. And one day he came to me and he said, Jeffrey, do you know what the Philosopher's Stone is? I said, no, what is it? He said, the Philosopher's Stone which is the stone that turns lead into gold in your soul. The Philosopher's Stone is the obstacles that you face in life. And he had to face many obstacles. He started to work on inventing the helicopter in 1926 when he graduated from Princeton University and went to the patent office and looked for an unsolved problem that he could work on. It didn't get completed until 1947, 21 years he worked on it. And for much of that time, he worked on unsuccessful designs, but he persisted. And he actually had the very first commercially licensed helicopter, the Bell Model 47. So that's another lesson in manifesting. Genghis Galahad says, how might one reconcile or resolve the seeming contradiction of ancestors with reincarnation? Okay, let me see if I understand the seeming contradiction. There are cultures like Native Americans, Japanese, many cultures engage in what you might call ancestor worship. They believe their ancestors are in heaven, including their old ancestors. And if they pray to the ancestors are closer to God. And therefore, the ancestors can kind of pass on messages to the divine. Now, but if the ancestors get reincarnated, then they can't do that, because they're already in physical form, and therefore they're no closer to God than you are. I think that's the contradiction. Now, I suppose if I were going to try and reconcile that contradiction, I'd have to say that the evidence that some people do reincarnate is quite strong at this point. The people at the University of Virginia Department of Perceptual Studies, originally established by the psychiatrist Ian Stevenson, and it's still active. They have in their database over 2,500 cases where young children remember having had previous lives. And in about half of those cases, they've been able to establish that the previous life existed, much as the children remembered. Now, you can say that doesn't prove reincarnation, and that's correct, it doesn't. It only proves that the children have these mental impressions. How they got them, we don't know for sure, but reincarnation seems pretty likely. So let's say that some people reincarnate. It doesn't mean everybody does. But it also means that your ancestors might have already reincarnated. So don't count on them. Don't pray to them. Find some other way to pray. If I had to choose between ancestor worship and reincarnation, and fortunately I don't, but if I did, I put my money on reincarnation. But then again, Manly Hall once said the average length of time between incarnations is 2,500 years. That's not consistent with the data from these 2,500 cases. But then again, that's a relatively small sample in relationship to the billions of people who have been born and died. So I don't think it's necessarily the case that everybody need reincarnate. 98 Ashlyn asks, hi, how can I strengthen my intuitive gifts? And 98 Ashlyn, you're lucky, because tomorrow, in fact, at midnight tonight, USA Mountain Time, I am releasing a video with Emmy Vadnais, who is the author of a book called Intuitive Development. And the interview, which will be released tomorrow, talks exactly about this. There goes my phone in the other room, if you can hear it. Sorry, it's too far away for me to turn it off right now. But in any case, Emmy is a practitioner of energy medicine. And she found that at a point in her life when things looked really bleak for Emmy, and she was depressed and maybe even feeling suicidal, she began to get in touch with studying the body's energies, getting in touch with the subtle powers of the human body itself, the ki energy, the breathing, getting in touch with stress management and the like, becoming aware of different systems of thought that talk about these higher forms of energy, the koshas, the nadis, the chakras around the body, to realize that you're a much, much larger person than is normally thought to be the case if you simply consider materialistic science. It worked beautifully for Emmy, and I think it's a good starting point. So check out the video. It's going to be released in just about another 8 hours. Julie Tasker asks, how do you see science and spirituality respectfully coming together? And I like that word, respectfully, Julie. Earlier, when someone was asking me about manifesting, advice for manifesting, and I said, we need to be patient. And I think the same is true with regard to science and spirituality. They are coming together. Right now, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of scientists who are working on these issues, and people from various spiritual communities as well. There are dozens and dozens, probably hundreds of good books. I mean, one of the reasons that I'm able to release a new video, as I'm endeavoring to do lately, every single day, is because so much is happening on that front. At the same time, there's so much yet to be done. And I think you can't rush it. It's going to happen in its own good time. The sociologist Pitirim Sorokin, who I admire greatly, has written about this in his book, The Crisis of Our Age, and in his 3-volume set of books, Social and Cultural Dynamics. And he points out that it could be a very rough road to getting there, because basically, and this is also relating to the question of creative destruction that another viewer brought up earlier. Basically, in order to establish a new metaphysics, an ethos for a civilization based on the respectful integration of science and spirituality coming together, we're going to have to get rid of the materialistic metaphysics that has dominated Western society for the last 500 years or so. And that we're experiencing that now. That's why we're having so much breakdown in the social contract. That's why people talk about the reality of what is it called? Non-truth, non-fact base. The norms of government, the norms of society are breaking down. I mean, all of this tension, the very things that I discussed when I introduced this live stream an hour ago exactly. Incidentally, that means I'll keep going for approximately another half hour. We're seeing a breakdown now, and people are wondering what is going on. Why are people not getting along with each other? Well, it's part of this search for a new ethos. That's the word my friend Jason uses, and I like that word. A new ethos, or as Sorokin might say, a new metaphysics. That he called it the glue that holds society together. And the glue is coming apart, because to the extent that the glue was the old religions, they don't work too well. To the extent that the glue was scientific materialism, people see where that's leading us towards, pollution, nuclear war, and other problems associated with greed. So society is experiencing something of a breakdown, and naturally, I hope that it will very soon correct itself. But the corrections can take time. It could take 50 years, 100 years, 1,000 years. I don't know. It happens when it will happen. Sorokin, who I thought had a brilliant analysis, suggested that you can't rush it. If you try to, as some people have tried to proclaim that they have the new paradigm, you can't do it by proclamation. Even if you do have what you think of as a paradigm that works, as some of my friends who have been interviewed on this channel would say. Sorokin says that that's what he would call a premature syncretism. It's an attempt to force the unity of science and spirituality before our culture is really ready for it. Genghis Galahad asks, is the breakdown necessary for renewal? Old ways fall away to make way for the new. And I'd like to say, Genghis, that these things will happen and it will be natural and it will be peaceful and God is in heaven and all is well with the world and the old will melt away and the new will gracefully replace it. Oh, how I wish that would be true. I do. And I think it's up to us as a culture, as a civilization, to make it true to the extent that we can, which is one of the reasons that I'm a pacifist. I don't think war is the way we get there when it comes to destruction. But yes, obviously, if you're clinging to a system of beliefs that are inconsistent with the facts, inconsistent with the actual reality in the world, then it does need to fall away. And as I explained earlier, what tends to happen instead, because of processes described as cognitive dissonance, is that people cling even more strongly to the old beliefs when that happens. At least many people do. The people who are really committed to those old beliefs in the face of contradictory evidence or failed prophecies cling even more strongly. And that's a process that we have to respect because it's the way of the world. Here is 4ND7EW303 Beanie, who says, Jeff, do you think the purpose of life is just to exist or to refine ourselves spiritually? Do you think there's a heaven and hell and that will be judged? I think it was Alexander Pope, the English poet, who said there is no such thing as heaven or hell, but that the mind makes it so. Heaven and hell are the prisons of our own thoughts. That's my belief about that. Even after you die, I think you may be a prisoner of your own thoughts, which is one of the reasons I believe that the Buddhists suggest it's a good idea to move beyond all thought. But do I think that refining ourselves spiritually is a good way to phrase the purpose of life? I think it's pretty good. I think, though, for you, you have to look at yourself. What does that really mean? The way I often say it to people is become the best version of yourself, not just spiritually, but in every regard, especially with regard to the people in your life with whom you are in relationship, your friends and family. Become the best version of yourself for them and the best version of yourself for yourself. That, to me, is a purpose of life. But maybe for some people, just existing is enough. I don't want to necessarily impose my view on anybody else, actually. I think each person has to come to their own decision about how they regard the purpose of their life. 1995 Yuda asks, can you talk about psychosomatic, esoteric, mystic systems as a living praxis for subtle body work? They are across all true spiritual paths. You know, I could talk about it. I'm not much of an expert, really, but you've got the acupuncture meridians come out of China. You've got the chakra system that comes out of India. In fact, it's very involved. I hope some of you have had a chance to view the interview that was released about a week ago with Debashish Banerjee on the chakras. It was very elegant about the many levels described in the Hindu scriptures regarding the subtle energies of the body. And in the West, you've got Wilhelm Reich and orgone energy and so many people who are doing different kinds of body work. We discussed it in relationship to the Esalen Institute also in a recent interview. I'm big on it. I think that you can't ignore your body. It would be very nice if we were just spiritual beings and we could fly away from our bodies whenever they experience discomfort. In the 19th century, there was a very well-known writer. His last name was Graham, the fellow for whom the graham cracker was actually named. And he was a popular writer who said that you should only be aware of your body when it hurts, when you're sick. Otherwise, you don't need to feel your body at all. And that was the attitude that many people had. But actually, the body can be a source of enormous ecstasy. And I think of the body as a psychic antenna as well. The body is what receives all of this information that comes through in remote viewing and in psychic reading. And the interesting thing is, if you think your body ends with your skin, well, other systems suggest that may be the boundary of your physical body, but you have other bodies. You have an emotional body, you have an astral body, you have an etheric body, a mental body, a Buddha body. And they each go out and out and out and out until your body extends to the very far reaches of the universe, which is another reason that I like to tell people I embrace the whole universe. The very ground of being, the very possibility of having a physical existence at all is part of who we are in our bodies, actually. Mike asks, I'm deeply interested in your view on Jiddu Krishnamurti's teachings. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Love and peace. I do regret to ask once more. I know you've been asking multiple times, Mike, and our moderators have recommended, please only ask your questions once. But I know how the chat window flies. That's why I have moderators. I couldn't follow the chats. Anyway, you know, I haven't studied Jiddu Krishnamurti very much, but my sense is that his philosophy is very compatible with my own in the sense that I'm not a follower. I don't really subscribe to any particular cults or systems of belief. I think of each and every one of them as a unique window into the psyche, as a language. I try to embrace them all, talk about them all, understand them all, appreciate them all, but at the same time, maintain what my friend James Tunney would call my own sovereignty over myself. And I think that's exactly what Krishnamurti, Jiddu Krishnamurti, and not only him, but the other Krishnamurti who I once had the privilege of interviewing, U.G. Krishnamurti, would say. I think so. I'm very heartened by what some people would call the religion of no religion, or a sectarian spirituality. I'm big on that. Amir Barami says, Jeff, I once saw a video on YouTube. The guy said to get out of your body, you should either not think at all or think too much that your physical brain couldn't handle. What are my views on it? Amir, I'm probably not the best person to ask. I'm not an experienced out-of-body traveler. A couple of times I sort of thought about it. I've had experiences of flying in dreams. I don't advocate necessarily that you cultivate any of these skills. But, you know, there are many schools of training for out-of-body experience on the new Thinking Allowed channel. There are interviews about it on the tip of my tongue, but you can look it up in our archives, interviews on out-of-body travel. If you want to pursue it, there undoubtedly are different methods that might work well for you. You should either not think at all or think too much. Take your pick. I honestly don't know. And it's true, many of you are asking questions about which I am not knowledgeable. I know Dan O'Farrell asked me if I would comment on Dante's vision of hell and why are philosophers on the outer reaches of hell in Dante's vision. And I would love to pose that question to one of my guests like James Driscoll, who is a literary, a scholar of Renaissance literature. But there are many questions, unfortunately, I pass over simply because I don't have anything intelligent to say. Can you comment, Foolishness asks, on the notion expressed by Swami Chidananda, who you once interviewed, yeah, I remember him, that cities are not personal powers, but rather invisible beings that come to help you and can leave at will. Well, of course, the whole question of invisible beings is one that torments anybody with a scientific mind who wants to say, can we get a handle on this? And for example, my friend Stephen Browdy, the philosopher, says, ultimately, we don't have the means to distinguish between our own psi powers and the possibility of invisible beings. There's no scientific test for it. Now, I talk to many people who are convinced one way or the other, usually in favor of the invisible being hypothesis. And these are typically people who are experiencing cities. That's their report, almost to a person. Ted Owens was very clear. It was the space intelligences. Well, he was very clear every other day because he would also every other day say it was psychokinesis. Same thing with Stephen Browdy. I asked him once, how do you feel about survival after death? And he said, every other day I'm in favor of it. Every other day I think it's living agent psi. And at the end of the day, I say to myself, what's the difference? Living agent psi, cities, that they don't belong to your ego, that's for sure. They belong to what we might say in Jungian terms is yourself. Now, the self in Jungian terms is the part of you that is, you could say, connected to the divine, connected to God. And what part of us is connected to God would be, I think, what in the Hebrew scriptures is called the Elohim, the heavenly hosts, the divine beings, the angels, the spirits. So there is a sense in which these invisible beings are us, but they're not us at the ego level. They are us at the level of mind at large that we partake of. Andre Fonseca says, as a pacifist, how do you observe the role of violence and aggression in reality? Well, I certainly have aggressive impulses, and I'm sure we all do. Sigmund Freud made that very clear. It's one of the great paradoxes of living in a civilization that we have all these animal instincts, but civilization tells us we must behave like gentlemen and gentle ladies. And so it sets up a conflict for each of us. Now, I happen to think we've reached a point in history where we don't have to keep repeating the endless warfare that humanity has experienced for the last 5,000 years or so. It's no longer necessary. We can be more creative. We can move beyond that. We can solve our problems without engaging in warfare. We have that possibility. And because it's a possibility, we should go for it. It will be much better for everybody. Think of all the suffering that can be alleviated that way. But you're not going to do it by pretending that you don't have aggressive impulses, that sometimes you don't wish violence on other people, that you don't feel sometimes hatred in your heart. We do. And that's why I think many spiritual teachers talk about shadow work, talk about confronting the dark side, acknowledging it within yourself. I have an interview with my friend James Tunney. It hasn't been released yet, but it will be released soon. He practices martial arts. He has practiced many different ones, Brazilian, I think it's called capoeira, karate, judo, jujitsu, and he describes it as unarmed combat in a very structured format. He says it's necessary because of our species. We are hominids. We belong to the primate family, and you only have to look at our chimpanzee cousins to see what we're kind of capable of from time to time. I mean, chimpanzees can be wonderful, but they can be very nasty on occasion. And so can we. And so James thinks that one way to deal with the aggressive nature of human consciousness is through unarmed combat, boxing, wrestling, you name it, judo, WFC. He practices all of those and endorses them. I also like the work of William James, who talked about a moral equivalent to war, in which James points out that there are many positive merits, virtues associated with war: courage, bravery, self-sacrifice, camaraderie, patriotism. These things become glorified, and our fallen heroes and warriors become in many ways regarded as role models in our culture. But James says that's very important. We have to be able to create alternatives to that, where people can experience these virtues without having to create enormous suffering and killing of each other. I think the Peace Corps was an example of an effort in that direction. So James would suggest there are many other things like that that we could be doing, and I subscribe to those things. We have about 10 minutes remaining. 90 minutes is usually about my limit for doing these, but as I mentioned earlier, we are saving your questions. I plan to address more of the questions that didn't get answered, especially in the context of the in-presence monologues. But since we have 10 minutes, I'll keep going. Here, this is Ilio Renelo. Question: are the elites already going off or underworld? Wow. Fascinating question. I don't know exactly the reference here, but I suppose it has something to do with Possibly the conversation I had with Jason Giorgiani on the breakaway civilization, or it could be related to various conspiracy theories. Now, I have to tell you, I'm not big on conspiracy theories. I like to listen to them from time to time. I think they're fascinating, certainly make wonderful material for novelists. Um, I'm concerned about some of these theories. I think they can be destructive to our civilization when people have these ideas about evil elites. They're running the world and they are engaged in child sexual abuse and on like that. All of those theories to me reflect the breakdown of society. And yes, maybe it's a creative destruction of some sort, but where's the evidence? That's what you have to ask yourself over and over again. As a parapsychologist, I'm still wedded to empiricism. I'm looking for evidence, not just speculation. And I have no evidence that the elites are doing any such thing. Zero evidence. Now, and maybe you do. I'm well aware of the fact that you can find YouTube videos that make these claims, and chat groups and people who claim that they have the evidence, but it never has reached the level where I've felt that there's anything substantial there, to be quite honest. I don't think the elites are going anywhere. Surely there are many elite people, and I think by and large, they are endeavoring in their own way to make a positive contribution to society. As I have said on other occasions, I have faith in humanity. I think that the universe is basically friendly and that people are basically good. Sometimes it's touch and go, as Martin Luther King said, the arc of justice is long. Or I think it's the arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. I tend to subscribe to that view. And I think that means, we live in a pluralistic society where there are elites in many different fields of endeavor, whether it's politics or law or medicine or science or business or literature. And they're all contributing in their own way. I don't think any of them are escaping to Mars or escaping there might be a few going to underground shelters for all I know. I think some of them probably, I have heard that many people who of great wealth think that there is going to be a social breakdown and they're trying to find a place where they can hide out, an island or some place where they can avoid the cataclysm that they think might be coming. Here's a question from Zach Wolf. Do you think it's possible to map out or model the spiritual realm in a precise way, as we have done in the material realm with physics? Or is empiricism the wrong tool set for the job there? What a great question, Zach. I am favorably disposed to what you're saying. I have talked about on a few interviews the idea of psychonauts. People trained because they're skilled. It could be meditation, it could be lucid dreaming, it could be trance mediumship, to go into the inner space and endeavor to come back and report it so that we could build better maps of inner space. You certainly find it in ancient traditions, the Tibetan Book of the Dead that maps out the Bardo Plains, or the Egyptian Book of the Dead. I think these are early maps that have been created for us, and there are actually many such maps. The Kabbalistic Tree of Life is another such map. I think we can continue to make maps and continue to improve on the map making. I do think the empirical method will help us in that regard, but it's a long process, and the maps will probably just continue to be refined over a long period of time. Andy Oxide asks, besides your book, are there any interesting sources about Ted Owens? I read his book as well. Well, you can find a few things on the internet, but between Ted Owens' book and my book, that's 90% of, or 90, maybe 98, 99% of what's available, Andy. There was a fellow named Andy Eastman who at one time felt that he was doing work similar to Ted, and he felt close to Ted, and he had a website somewhere. I think I've written about him in my book, but you might look for people like that. Ted Owens, when he was alive, touched the lives of many people, some of whom have reported on the web of their experiences with him, although he died in 1987, really kind of before the web took off. Okay, maybe I can do one more question. High Voltage says, do you think the future of parapsychology and mind-body consciousness science will be dependent upon new technologies, or will enough people believing be enough to accelerate things? Well, I'd say both and. I don't think it's one or the other. It's certainly a positive social environment is absolutely essential. The negativity in society at large is clearly suppressing the research. New technologies will be helpful, and as people get more and more accustomed to new technologies and their applications to consciousness research, it will help whole new generations of people to get involved. So I think ultimately it's important that people simply be aware of the enormous body of research, 138 years of investigation since the Society for Psychical Research in England was first founded. That's one of the reasons why I have so much to say on the new Thinking Allowed channel. There's already so much to communicate that the large body of humanity is still unaware of. So I'm doing my best to spread the word, and I hope that those of you who are watching this video will share it as well, because there's a vast amount of information, and at least for me, and I think for many people who engage in this work, this is a study that is enormously rewarding on a personal level. And with that said, I'd like to thank you all for being with me. There have been wonderful questions posed. And as I say, I plan to keep answering these questions in the in-presence monologues over time. We're planning as well to do more live streams at the moment. Every other Sunday, I'm planning a live stream. 2 weeks from today, we are going to have Roger Nelson here in a YouTube live stream. Roger is the founder of the Global Consciousness Project. It's very exciting. You can see our earlier interview with Roger if you search through our archives. So once again, thank you all for being with me, and a special thanks to the moderators who have helped me field and answer all of your wonderful questions. And I will now end the live stream.